Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now, before we start the next section, there was one topic which I forgot to mention last week. And if you have last week's handouts, then it's on the last page. And the question or the issue is marriage within one's caste. Now, whether it is permissible to marry someone from your own caste system. Now, before we delve into that particular mas'ala, firstly, it should be understood that in Islam there is no such thing as nationalism. There is no such thing as like nations. There is no such thing as tribal feuds or anything like that in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made this quite clear in the Holy Quran by saying, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, that all the believers are brothers. So there's no such thing as Pakistanis or Bengalis or Arabs or anything like that in Islam. Everyone is equal. Now in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned the wisdom regarding or behind having different nationalities and different tribes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said that وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, that we have put you in different nations and in different tribes so that you may recognize each other, that you may recognize and differentiate one Muhammad from another, that you may recognize and differentiate one Bakr from another or one Ahmed from another. That's why you have different nationalities, so that it becomes easier for a person to recognize one person to another. Now, with regards to this particular issue, marriage within one's caste, then there are a couple of scenarios regarding it. The first scenario is that, just for the brothers who don't know what do we mean by caste here, that in every tribe or in every nation, you have what you call an upper class, you have a lower class, you have a middle class. Similarly, in many Pakistanis and in many Bengalis, you have like Chaudhries, you have Rajas and so on, and they are considered as the highest, or they are considered from a very high class. Now the question is that what does Islam say with regards to marrying someone from his own tribe or from his own caste? Now there are two scenarios. The first scenario is that if he is getting married to someone from his own caste with the intention of pride or due to pride and due to arrogance, and then that would not be allowed. The marriage will be done. However, the pride or the arrogance which he is showing, then that is something which is unlawful and something which is not allowed. Like for example, if a person is getting married, like he's a Chaudhry himself, and he's getting married to a Chaudhry girl. Now if he's getting married to that Chaudhry girl with the intention that, oh look, I'm from a very high class, how can I get married to someone from a middle class, how can I get married to someone from a lower class and so on, with those kind of intentions to show pride on his particular tribe because of arrogance, then that would not be allowed and that would be impermissible. The marriage will be done, the validity of the nikah will be done. However, for him to do that, then that is something which is not allowed. And everybody knows the hadith with regards to pride, very famous hadith of Sahih al-Muslim, narrated by Sayyidina Abdullah bin Mas'ud radhiyallahu anhu, that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that a person who has an atom of pride, an atom of takabbur in his heart, then that person would not enter Jannah, that person would not enter paradise. So if it is done out of pride or arrogance, as mentioned in the slide in front of you, then that is something which is condemned and something which is not allowed in Islam. However, if a man is getting married to a girl who's also a Chaudhry, with the intention that this girl, she is pious, or this girl is compatible for me, or like for example some other religious reason, then that would be allowed, that would be permissible. Like for example, just say he's a Chaudhry himself and he's looking for a girl, and he finds a girl who happens to be a Chaudhry, but he's marrying her not because she's a Chaudhry, not because she's from a higher class, but he's marrying her because she is pious. As mentioned in the hadith, فَصْدَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ فَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ, that because she is pious, and the reason why he chose her was because of her piety, not because of her status, then in that situation, the nikah, obviously, the validity of the nikah, there's no question about that, that will be done. But on top of that, the intention which he made to get married to that particular girl, then he will not be condemned by Islam or by the Sharia for that particular reason. And if you look at the next slide, then just some hadith is talking about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibiting what he calls ta'assub, like nationality. And the hadith of Sunnah Abu Dawood, that verily Allah has removed from you the stupidity of the Jahiliyyah and the boasting of their ancestors. Whether you are God-fearing believers or wretched sinners, you are the sons of Adam, and Adam alayhi salam was created from dust. Indicating that, whether you are, like obviously this was a issue in the days of ignorance, that there was a lot of nationality, there was all this tribal feud and so on. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came and he told the Sahaba there's no such thing as nationality, there's no such thing as tribal feud, and everyone is equal and everyone is a believer. Now the next issue which I'm going to look at, I haven't actually made any slides for that. And the reason why is that this is not a jurisprudence masla. So therefore, because it's nothing to do with fiqh, so therefore I thought that there's no need for me to write a slide or even give handouts for that, but it's just like a word of advice. Now the next issue which we are going to look at is what does Islam say with regards to marrying a girl from another culture or from another country. Now what does Islam say for a person who has been brought up in this country, for him to go back to Pakistan and get married to a girl from Pakistan? Or what does Islam say, or what the scholars have said with regards to a boy brought up in this country, or even a girl who's been brought up in this country, then she goes back to Bangladesh or India or whatever, and she gets married to a guy from there. Now, as I just said, that this masla, which I'm going to talk about now, is nothing to do with the fiqh aspect, meaning that there's no doubt that if a boy is been brought up in this country, if he goes to Pakistan and gets married, the marriage is valid. There's nothing wrong with that. The marriage is done. If he goes back to Bangladesh and he gets married, the marriage is done. If he goes to Australia, or if he goes to Canada, or if he goes to America, and if he just finds a girl there and he gets married, then there's nothing wrong with it. The marriage and the nikah will be done. But the topic, or in this particular topic, we're going to be looking at the appropriateness of it. That whether it is appropriate for a boy brought up in this country or a girl brought up in this country going back to India, going back to Pakistan, going back to Bangladesh, and then getting married to a boy from there. Now, the topic or the angle which I'm going to look at this particular issue or topic is not for everyone, meaning that there may be some of you, even though you have been brought up in this country, it may be advisable or it may be good that you go back to Bangladesh and get married to someone from there. That there could be some brothers who are comfortable with their communication skills are okay, then there's nothing wrong with them going back to Bangladesh or going back to Pakistan and getting married to a girl from there. There's nothing wrong. But the angle which I'm going to discuss this issue is that a kid or a youth or a person who's been brought up in this country, who's been born in this country, who's basically lost touch with Bangladesh, with his relatives or with his grandfathers in Bangladesh and Pakistan. And he's been brought up like a proper white person, like a proper Western person. And then for him to coerce that person to go back to Pakistan or to go back to Bangladesh and make him marry someone who's not socially compatible with him, I'm going to look at this topic from that particular angle. And because it kind of applies with many of us, because we are in this second generation now where we've been brought up in this country, and we've basically, like, our kind of thinking and our mentality and our ideology is totally different from a girl who lives in Bangladesh, who lives in Pakistan, who was raised in the villages, who was raised with cows, who was raised with goats and so on, is totally different from them. So now we're looking at whether it is appropriate for a Muslim guy who's been brought up in this country to go back there and get married. Now obviously whatever information I'm giving, it's not from my own pocket or anything like that. This is not my kind of personal advice, because truthfully I'm not really on that level to give personal advice. This is what I'm saying is actually being said by my teachers from Darul Berry senior muftis such as Shaykh al-Hadith, Mufti Shabbir Sahib, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give barakah and blessings in his knowledge, he's actually mentioned this in his many lectures on hadith. Now Mufti Sahib has mentioned that there are two reasons why he is totally against a person going back to Pakistan, going back to Bangladesh and getting married to a girl from there. The first reason he mentioned was communication problems. That generally speaking, a Bengali who's been brought up in this country, he's just Bengali by name. Like, he's just Bengali by name. But in terms of communication, he probably knows Urdu or he probably knows English Bengali. That's how poor his Bengali is. Now to coerce that person to go all the way to Bangladesh and get married to a girl and then just hope that, they're just just hope that everything will work out, then you are actually destroying your son's life, or you are actually destroying your daughter's life. Because it doesn't happen like that. Marriage is as I said before, they have to be compatible with each other. The boy and girl, they have to be mentally on the same wavelength. The interest which a boy has, the girl has to have the same interest. The same thinking, they have to have more or less the same thinking, the same ideology, the same mentality. If you have a boy who's got his mentality is something else and the girl's mentality is something else, then there's a clash already. So exactly the same thing here. The first thing is a communication problem, because when the man or when the husband, when he cannot communicate with his wife, so obviously the wife just knows Bengali and the man just knows English, he doesn't even know Bengali properly. So when the man cannot communicate Bengali properly with his wife, then what's going to happen is that he's going to start communicating with women whom he shouldn't be communicating with. Like he'll go onto internet sites, he'll go at work, he may see someone there and he just chats to her and one thing leads to another and the next thing you know, they've done zina, they've done adultery and fornication. So that is the first problem. And the second problem, which I kind of indicated to you before, is, as I said, the social problem. That socially, the boy who's been brought up in this country is taught his mentality, his thinking, his ideology is totally different from a girl who lives in Bangladesh, who lives in Pakistan. And the best example my teacher gave was, like a person who's brought up in this country, like he's probably never ever had rice, or he's never ever had chapati or curry. He's probably been brought up with the diet like fish and chips and so on. So when he gets married to this girl, so he goes to his wife like, oh, make me fish and chips. So the girl who's been brought up in Bangladesh, she hasn't probably heard of fish and chips. The only thing she could make is probably like curries or rice or something like that. So again, you're like causing friction, or it's not causing, it's like a clash already. So because of these two reasons, there are many other reasons mentioned, but these are the main two. His view is that it is kind of inappropriate for a boy who's been brought up in this country, his mentality is like a Westerner, his mentality is like a white person, for him to just suddenly force him, coerce him to go to Bangladesh or Pakistan and get married to a girl there, then obviously it's going to lead to a very unhappy marriage. But as I said before, this is not a general ruling. There may be some who's brought up in this country, but for them they may want to go back home to Bangladesh or Pakistan and get married to a girl there. So for them, it's advisable and more preferable and recommended that they go back. But just for a general guy who's been brought up in this country, his mentality like a white person, mentality like a Westerner, then for him to go back, then it's considered inappropriate. So these were the first two issues. Inshallah, we're going to start the next topic, which is in the course book in front of you. And the title is Persons with whom nikah is haram. I.e. those people with whom nikah and marriage is haram and unlawful. Now, the criteria laid down by Islam for those women who are unlawful for you to marry is mentioned in the Quran itself, where in Surah An-Nisa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, Hurrimat alaykum ummahatukum. That prohibited for you are your mothers. So firstly, the first person or the first type of woman whom you are not allowed to marry is your mother. So everybody knows that your mother, you're not allowed to marry her. وَبَنَاتُكُمْ. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says your daughters. That it is haram for you to marry your daughters. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says وَأَخَوَاتُكُمْ. That it is haram and unlawful for you to marry your sisters. وَأَمَّاتُكُمْ. Your paternal aunt, your pupi. That it is haram and unlawful for you to marry your dad's sister. Your Pupi is your dad's sister, is known as a paternal aunt. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَخَالَاتُكُمْ. It is impermissible and lawful for you to marry your maternal aunt, i.e. your mum's sister. Your maternal aunt, i.e. your khala, is your mum's sister. وَبَنَاتُ الْأَخِي. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that it is impermissible and lawful for you to marry daughters of your brother, meaning your brother's daughters, i.e. your niece, your batiji, then it is haram and lawful for you to marry her. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, daughters of your sister, i.e. it is haram and lawful for you to marry your sister's daughters. So your niece or your banji, then it is haram and lawful for you to marry them. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, your mothers who suckle you, and your sisters through suckling. Now, this is a concept which is common during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, and even in this day and age you may find in some countries that they still carry this out. And that is that when a child is born, then its original mother, or its natural or its real mother, would not breastfeed the child. Instead, the mother will send this child to the villages or to a wet nurse who lives in the villages, and this wet nurse will breastfeed the child, will look after the child, nurture the child for 2 years, and then after that, the child will be returned back to its natural and original mother. And this happened with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as all of you know, that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born, he was born as an orphan. His father Abdullah had passed away. So his mother Amina sent Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to Hazrat Halima Sa'diyah, who for 2 years breastfed Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who looked after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who nurtured Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then after 2 years, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam was returned back to his mother Amina. So the masla which is in front of us is that the mother who suckled you, who breastfed you, it doesn't necessarily have to be your original mother. Nowadays it tends to be your original mother, your natural mother. But just say, for example, you have a scenario where another woman breastfed you, like your mother couldn't breastfeed for some reason, but instead another woman breastfed you. So if a woman breastfed you, then that woman is like considered as your real mother. So therefore it will be haram for you to marry that woman. And similarly, your sisters through suckling. Now what does that mean? It means, just say that mother who breastfed you, she had another girl with her, and she breastfed that girl. So just an example, like there's this mother who breastfeeds children. So she breastfed you, and she also breastfed another girl. So that girl becomes like your sister. Okay? So therefore, the same way it is haram and lawful for you to marry your own sister, similarly that girl, through suckling, she has become your sister, so therefore it will be impermissible and unlawful for you to marry that girl. Why? Because she has become your sister. So your sisters through suckling. Similarly, after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُمَّهَاتُ نِسَائِكُمْ, and mothers of your wives, mothers of your wives. Now, the next category of woman who's haram is your mother-in-law. Your mothers of your wives mean that your wife, her mother, or your mother-in-law, she is haram for you. As soon as you get married to a girl, then automatically her mother becomes haram for you. Obviously, we're going to look at this masla in detail later, but as soon as the aqd is done, there's no condition for you to have intercourse with this girl before her mother becomes haram. As soon as the marriage is done, as soon as you said, like, I accept in front of the gathering and so on, then automatically her mother becomes haram for you. So therefore you cannot marry her mother ever. Even to the extent that if you were to, just say, if you were to divorce your wife, and then after that you want to get married to her mother, then that would not be allowed. Okay? So it is impermissible for you to get married to the mother of your wife. Okay? Even though you may have got married to her, then you may have divorced her straight away. But as soon as you got married to her, then automatically your mother-in-law is haram and is unlawful for you. Then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَبَائِبُكُمُ اللَّاتِي فِي حُجُورِكُم مِّن نِّسَائِكُمُ اللَّاتِي دَخَلْتُم بِهِنَّ, and your stepdaughters under your care who are born of your women with whom you have had intercourse, فَإِن لَمْ تَكُونُوا دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنَّ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ, but if you have not had intercourse with them, then there is no sin on you. Now the next section which we are going to look at is with regards to stepdaughters. Now whether it is permissible for a man to marry his stepdaughter. Just for example, you've married a woman, you married a girl, and she has a daughter from a previous marriage. Now the question is that whether it is permissible for you to marry this particular stepdaughter later on. Now the masla or the ruling is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it clear in the Quran, and that is the condition of dukhul. That is the condition of intercourse and penetration. Now what do I mean by that? Is just as example, you married a girl and you've had intercourse with her, or you've done things which are similar to intercourse, meaning that you've kissed her, you've touched her with desire and so on, then after that, automatically her daughter, i.e. your stepdaughter, will become haram and unlawful for you. Just as example, like you got married to a girl and then you've slept with her that night, or you've had intercourse with her that night, or you've touched her, you've caressed her or anything, massaged her and so on, and then after that you've divorced her. Then it will not be lawful, it will not be halal for you to marry her stepdaughter. Okay? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it quite clear that دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِمْ, that if you have had intercourse with her, then her stepdaughter will become haram and lawful for you. But the next line Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِن لَمْ تَكُونُوا دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنَّ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْكُمْ. However, if you have not had intercourse with her, if you didn't touch her with lust, if you didn't kiss her, hug her with lust or desire, then her stepdaughter is still lawful and halal for you. So what do I mean by that? You just say a person, he gets married to a girl, and then straight away he divorces that woman. He gets married to her, and without having intercourse with her, without kissing her, without touching her, without looking at her in a lustful or in a way, what happens is that he divorces her straight away. Then after that, it will be permissible for him to marry his stepdaughter. Why? Because there wasn't any intercourse, there wasn't any kind of penetration, any kind of touching, any kind of caressing, any kind of kissing with her with lust, anything like that. So therefore, her stepdaughter afterwards would become lawful for you. Now the next masala, so that kind of concluded the Quranic verse. And after that, some of the miscellaneous rulings. The first ruling is that, okay, before we look at the miscellaneous ruling, just two other situations here. One situation. And that is with regards to your chachi. It's not mentioned in the book, but it's quite an important question because people are not sure whether your chachi, your dad's brother's wife, is a mahram or a ghair mahram for you. Now the masla is, or the ruling is that your chachi, your dad's brother's wife, she is a ghair mahram for you, meaning that she is considered as a strange woman, meaning that you can marry your dad's brother's wife later. Just as example, if she happens to divorce or whatever, or something happens, then you can actually marry your chachi, you can actually marry your dad's brother's wife. Okay, there's nothing wrong with it. Because obviously when we looked at the Quranic verse, it doesn't say anything regarding your dad's brother's wife, does it? Nothing. It doesn't say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made your dad's brother's wife, i.e. your chachi, haram and lawful for you. So therefore your chachi is lawful for you and you can get married to her if you want. Okay, now some miscellaneous rulings afterwards. Marriage with one's son-in-law is not permissible. This is irrespective of whether the daughter is already living with him or not. In all cases, nikah with him is haram. So as I mentioned, that's the same way it is haram for a person to marry his mother-in-law, or for a girl to marry her father-in-law. Then similarly, it is also haram for a person to marry his son-in-law, or for a person to marry his daughter-in-law, or for a woman to marry her son-in-law. Okay, it's considered haram. As I mentioned, as soon as the marriage contract is done, then therefore, these women become haram for you. Your mother-in-law becomes haram, and similarly, if you have a son and he gets married to a girl, then automatically that girl, your daughter-in-law, will become haram and unlawful for you. The next masala after that is, as long as a sister is married to her husband, it is not permissible for another sister to marry this brother-in-law of hers. Now just say for example you're married to a girl, then her sister is haram. Meaning as we know in Islam you're allowed to get married 4 times. So just say for example you married a girl, then to marry her sister at the same time or whilst you're still married with the first girl, then that is haram, that is unlawful. However, if you divorce the first sister and after she passes a period, which is 3 menstruation cycles, then after that you can marry her sister. Or for example, just say her sister passed away, and then after that you can marry her sister. So what I'm trying to say, the masla here is that whilst you're in nikah with a girl, whilst you're in marriage with a girl, then it's unlawful and haram for you to marry her sister. But if you, for example, divorced her, or if she passed away, then it is permissible for you to marry her sister. The next masla afterwards is with regards to adoption. Now, adoption is not considered to be one's real son or daughter in the Sharia. Now, this is a very important masla. Now, there are many virtues with regards to adopting a child. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was an orphan himself, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also adopted. Probably heard of the story of Hazrat Zayd bin Harith, which is mentioned in the Quran, which I'm going to mention later. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also adopted a child. And there's also another hadith of Sahih al-Bukhari, where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that I am the guardian of an orphan. Meaning, I am that person who looked after an orphan would be like this on the Day of Judgment. Or would be like this, in paradise. Not Day of Judgment, in paradise, in Jannah. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gestured with his index finger and his middle finger, indicating towards how close that person will be with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in paradise and in Jannah. So there are many virtues of adopting a child and children. Now, however, one thing which needs to be clear, and that is that when you've adopted a child, like just for example, you adopted a girl from a young age, that girl is not your real daughter. Okay? When she reaches the age of puberty, then it is necessary for you to either send her somewhere, or either she can live with you in your house, but you do parda from her, you do hijab from her. Because that girl is not your real daughter. For example, you've adopted a boy, then that boy isn't your real daughter, a real son. Okay, so whoever you have adopted, whether it's a girl, whether it's a boy, then they are not your real son and they are not your real daughter. And this is a principle which is mentioned in the Holy Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quite clearly says, وَمَا جَعَلَ أَدْعِيَاءَكُمْ أَبْنَاءَكُمْ, that your adopted sons are not your real sons. Your adopted sons are not your real sons. And one of the beauty of Islam, or one of the things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's infinite wisdom is that things which are what to do with custom, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would use Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to eradicate that custom. Now, before or during Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's time, the custom in or during the days of ignorance was that a person's adopted son would be considered as his real son. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to eradicate this custom, and what he did was that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had an adopted son. His name was Zayd bin Haritha. So what happened was, Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anhu, he divorced his wife called Zainab bint Jahsh radiallahu anha. Now, as we just looked at above, that obviously, to marry your daughter-in-law is haram. So obviously Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had this adopted son. So because the Arabs thought that your adopted sons are your real sons, so therefore, strictly speaking, according to the custom, it would have been unlawful for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to marry Hazrat Zainab bint Jahsh radiallahu anha. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to show and demonstrate and illustrate that this is a custom, and custom got nothing to do with Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and commanded Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to get married to Hazrat Zainab bint Jahsh radiallahu anha, who happened to be the ex-wife of his adopted son, Hazrat Zayd bin Haritha, to show the Arabs, to show everyone that your adopted sons are not your real sons, and therefore you can, their ex-wife or their wife, you can marry them afterwards. So that is something which needs to be, which is clear, and that is that your adopted sons or your daughters, they are not considered your real sons. And the next masla after that is that all the relations which become haram on account of lineage also become haram on account of breastfeeding. As we just mentioned, that the same way your natural mother, your real mother is haram. So if somebody breastfeeds you, then she becomes your real mother, so therefore she will become haram. Or another girl, just say she breastfed from the same mother, then she becomes like your sister, so therefore it will be haram for you to marry her, as we have discussed earlier. Now before we look at the next section, if we just have a look at the question sheet of last week. So obviously we looked at the principle, so it should be very easy to answer. Is a person allowed to marry the following? Stepdaughter. So Habibul Islam, stepdaughter. Are you allowed to marry your stepdaughter? If you just elaborate.
If you had a Juma with the wife, then you're not allowed to marry.
Okay, but if you didn't do Juma, just say for example you touched her, would you be still allowed to marry your stepdaughter? You touched your wife, say, with lust, so would you be still allowed to marry your stepdaughter?
No.
No, okay. Abdul Majid. So just if example you didn't touch her with lust or you didn't have intercourse with your wife, would you be allowed to marry your stepdaughter?
If you have intercourse, you're allowed to marry.
Okay, you're allowed to marry. Okay. Alright, next one, stepmother. The brother. Stepmother. No, stepmother meaning like, yeah, your stepmother. Yes, so we're going to, like your dad's wife. No, you can't, no. I haven't looked at that, Masla. I don't think I mentioned it. I can't mention it. Can you just give it up? Can you just give it up? Okay, well, I'll come back to that later. Next one, number 3, foster sisters. Foster sisters are those like you suckle. For example, the mother, you like drank milk from her, so somebody else has drank milk from her as well. So I'd like to marry that girl. No, okay. Adopted sister. The brother, adopted sister. Now, for example, your parents or your dad, he adopted a girl, so she's become like your adopted sister. So I'd like to marry her. Yes, because your adopted sister doesn't become your real sister. And lastly, your uncle's wife, Chachi. I'd like to marry her. Okay. Yeah, just one masla I forgot to mention is with regards to your dad's wife or your stepmother. Then your dad's wife, they are haram for you. As soon as your dad, just for example, he got married to another woman, then she becomes haram for you. Okay, in the next section, hurmat musahara. Now, the next section which we're going to look at is linked with persons with whom nikah is not allowed or is unlawful, and it's called hurmat musahara. And this is it's one of those topics which doesn't receive the coverage which it deserves. Many books which have been written on nikah, which have been written on marriage, but you'll find very few books which actually covers this particular topic. Now this particular topic is important, but at the same time it's a dangerous topic. It's so dangerous that if this occurs, then the nikah or the marriage breaks. That if this happens, then the nikah and the marriage between you and your wife will break. So that's how severe and that's how dangerous this topic is. And it's even more quite severe in the Hanafi fiqh, which I'm going to mention later. So because of that reason, I thought I'll just take this opportunity in this marriage course and so on to actually mention a few things regarding this particular course and this particular topic. Now if you just have a look at the course book in front of us, the basic definition of hurmat musahara is that it is a law of Sharia that forbids specific men from marrying specific women. Okay? So it is a law where a man is not allowed to marry certain women, or certain women will not be allowed to marry certain men. Okay? Now as I've just said, that in the Hanafi fiqh, this is more severe, or it is more dangerous. Meaning that in the Hanafi fiqh, if this happens, in an unlawful way, then even then the marriage still breaks. In the other schools of thought, like Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayhi, fiqh, or in the Hanbali mazhab or in the Maliki mazhab, they have these same principles, but in their mazhab or in their fiqh, it is through lawful relationship or through a lawful way. Whereas in the Hanafi fiqh, if this happens through a lawful way or through an unlawful way, it doesn't matter, the ruling will be the same, and that is that your marriage will break. Okay? Now, if we just have a look at the bullet points which are in front of us, that there are three. Okay, now before we look at the bullet point, what Hurmat al-Musahara does is basically when this happens, then your ancestors and your descendants becomes haram. Like for example, just say I have intercourse with a woman, or somebody has an intercourse with a woman, then that woman's ancestors, meaning that girl or that woman's grandmother, mother, great-grandmother, and so on, will become haram upon you. And at the same time, that girl or that woman's descendants, i.e. her daughter, her great-granddaughter, whatever, they will become haram for you. Okay, the girl itself, she will be still halal for you. However, her ancestors and her descendants will become haram and lawful for you. Okay, when I explain the rulings after that, you'll understand what do I mean. Now, if we just have a look at the first condition or the first bullet point, is Hurmat al-Musahara will occur when lawful intercourse takes place, either through marriage or unlawful intercourse through adultery and fornication, with the condition that both the boy and the girl are mature. And I've written in brackets, this is the fatwa which is found in Raddul Muhtar, that is that the girl should not be less than 9 years and the boy should not be less than 12 years. So I'll give you an example. Let's say a person, like Zayd, he's got married to Zainab. So Zayd, he has intercourse with Zainab. Okay? Or just say, for example, in an unlawful relationship, like for example, Zayd, he's met Zainab and then he does adultery with her or he fornicates with her. Now when he fornicated with Zainab, or when he had this haram illicit relationship with Zainab, then automatically Zainab's mother, Zainab's grandmother will become haram for Zayd. And similarly vice versa, i.e. automatically Zayd's father and Zayd's grandfather will become haram for Zainab. And similarly, if Zainab has any daughters, they will become haram for Zayd, and if Zayd has any sons, they will become haram for Zainab. So that's what Hurmat al-Musahara is. The first condition where Hurmat al-Musahara can be established is through intercourse. The second way, the second bullet point, that is straightforward, so there's nothing to really elaborate on. But the second point is quite different. The second way where Hurmat al-Musahara can be established is through touching. That if there is lust in either the mature or close to mature boy or girl when they make physical contact, i.e. touching, kissing, either through lawful means such as marriage or unlawful way like adultery or fornication. Now the second way where Hurmat al-Musahara can be established is, like let's say there's a boy, Zayd, and he touches a girl, okay? And whilst touching this girl, he has a desire, he has a lust, and obviously the definition of lust is coming later, that he has a lust, he has a desire. Then Hurmat al-Musahara will be established, i.e. that girl's mother, grandmother will become haram for him, and that girl's daughter and granddaughter will become haram for him. Okay, so just for example, just say a person, like, I don't know, there's a girl, I don't know, he just meets a girl, say, and he's shaking hands with a girl. Obviously, he shouldn't be shaking hands with a girl, but just for example, through work or whatever, he shakes hands with a girl. So while shaking hands with a girl, he touched the girl's hand, and then while touching the girl's hand, he experiences this lust, which is coming up later, like for example, he has an erection, or like for example, he has this feeling in his heart of lust. Then automatically, that girl's mother, grandmother, haram for him. If that girl has a daughter, she will become haram for him. That guy's father, grandfather will become haram for the girl. That guy, if he has a son, he will become haram for the girl. Okay? So that is the second condition. And obviously it should also be understood that the girl which you have touched, she has to be 9 years old or over, not a kid, like just say for example you touched a girl at school, like when you were like 2-3 years old or something like that in nursery. Obviously Hurmat al-Musahara is an established field there. Just like you have to be like 9 years old, okay? Okay, now the third condition or the third bullet point is through nazar or through looking. That if a male looks at the inner part of a female's vulva with lust, or a female looks at a male's private part with lust. Now the third condition, or the third way where hurmat al-musahara can be established is that a man, he looks at the inner part of a female's private part, i.e. the vagina, the male, he looks at it, the inside part. Okay? Or, and obviously when he looks at the woman's private part, there is lust there whilst looking at her. Or the woman looks at the man's private part. So the woman looks at the man's penis and there is lust there from the woman's side. Now if one of these three things happen, then hurmat al-musahara will be established. Okay? Obviously there's some miscellaneous rulings afterwards which I'm going to, which we'll analyze later. Now the next part is the definition of lust. Now, as I mentioned before, under category number 2 and 3, that for example a person, he touched a girl with lust, with desire, or a woman was looking at the man's private part with lust, or a man looked at the woman's inner part with lust. So what is the definition of lust? Like, how would you define lust? Now there are 4 tests which have been mentioned. Number 1 is erection. I'm just going to quickly mention the main point is erection. So for example, if a person was touching a girl, as soon as he touched that girl, he has an erection. Okay? Or a person, he may have been, or his penis may have been erected from before, but when he touched that girl, his erection increased. So that is the first test that we put on erection. Now for example, a man, he touched a girl, while touching her, then automatically has an erection. Or for example, a man, he touches a girl, he was erect from before, but while touching the girl, his erection increases. The second test is for those men who cannot have an erection, like old men who cannot have an erection. Then how would we determine whether there's been lust when they've touched a girl or not? So the masla is just, if example, is an old man, or just say a man who's got some physical illnesses, he cannot have an erection. He touched a girl, or he looked at a girl's private part, and whilst looking at the girl's private part, or whilst touching the girl, he had lust in his heart. Obviously, that person doesn't have an erection, so we can't, determine hurmat al-musahara through erection. So we need to look at his heart. Obviously, we won't look at, it's like one of the subjective tests that a person will have to, assume himself, that we look at the heart. That if there was desire in his heart of, evil, of, committing zina or adultery with that girl, then that means that there was lust while touching that girl. Okay? And the third bullet point is with regards to a female. That if a female or if a woman touched a man, or if a woman looked at the man's private part, then how are we going to determine lust or desire? So it's similar to number 2, that is through looking at the heart. That if in the heart, if there was if there was lust or desire in the heart, then if there was lust and desire in the heart, then that shows that this woman had desire whilst touching that boy, or had desire whilst looking at the boy or the man's private part, so therefore hurmat al-musahara will be established. And the last bullet point is that it is not necessary that both persons experience lust when physical contact is made. Lust is either the male or the female will be sufficient for hurmat al-musahara. Meaning that it's not necessary that when the boy touched the girl, that the boy and the girl, both of them had lust. If only the boy had the lust, or if only the girl had the lust, then in that situation hurmat al-musahara will be established. Or if the man looked at the woman's private part, even though the woman may not have had the lust, but the man did, so hurmat al-musahara will be established. Okay? Now, keeping the principles in mind, if we have a look at the miscellaneous ruling, a man committed adultery with a certain woman. Now, it will not be permissible for her mother or her children to marry this man. That's straightforward. That a person he did zina, he did adultery or fornication with a woman. So therefore, it will not be permissible for that girl's mother or for that girl's daughter or children to marry this particular man. Now, the next situation. Due to the passions of youth, a woman touched a man with evil intentions. It will now not be permissible for her mother or her children to marry this man. Similarly, if a man touches a woman with evil intentions, her mother and her children will be haram upon him. Okay? Now on that particular principle, that's what I mentioned before, that it's a very dangerous topic. Now, how is it dangerous? Like we see many times in marriages where, like for example, when the boy and girl, when they get married, so what normally happens is that the boy and girl, they will be on the stage. And sometimes the girl's mother will kind of come and touch the groom's hand. Or for example, they'll be like touching like for example, give something to her or touch his hand or something like that. It's like a custom showing that like I'm giving my daughter to you and so on. Now just say for example, the mother-in-law, for example, Zayd and Zainab, they are married together, and then the mother-in-law, Zainab's mother-in-law, touches Zayd's hand. And while touching Zayd's hand, Zayd experiences lust. Zayd experiences shahwa. Or, for example, I said, Hurmat Musa doesn't have to be from both sides, it could be from just one. Or, for example, like Zainab's mother touched Zayd's hand, and Zayd didn't experience anything, but his mother did. Then in that situation, what would happen? Well, you want to explain? Hurmat Musa will happen. So what would that mean? So therefore,
If the nikah hasn't been done.
no, just the nikah is done. So what would happen? Oh, okay. Yes, but basically, your mother-in-law, obviously, when she touched you, then what's the ruling? Her ancestors and her descendants, you're not allowed to marry them. So just for example, Zaynab's mother-in-law touched Zayd. So obviously, the mother-in-law's ancestors, like mother, grandmother, they're not around. But obviously, you've got married to who? The daughter. So therefore, the daughter will become haram for you. So therefore, the nikah will break straight away. So that's how dangerous this particular issue is, and I'll mention later on that what would happen in that situation. Okay. The next masla is even more happens a lot. It's quite dangerous. Is that in the middle of a night, a man decided to awaken his wife. However, he mistakenly touched his daughter or his mother-in-law. For example, a person is sleeping with his wife and so on. So in the middle of the night, he wanted to call his wife, but he touched a girl or he touched someone, assuming to be his wife, but with lust, but it turned out later to be his daughter. Okay, let's say a scenario like they were staying in the same room, the mother, the daughter, and the husband. So the husband he wakes up and he's touching his wife with lust, but they later realize that he actually touched his daughter, and the daughter is again has to be over 9 years old, is around 9-10 years old. So he touched her instead with lust. So when he touched her with lust, so therefore, what's the ruling? Her mother, i.e. his wife, will become haram for him. Okay, they won't be able to, be in nikah or in marriage. And probably even in Darwisa we get many questions where there was this guy, he did something bad with his daughter, meaning that he raped his daughter. So when he raped his daughter, obviously intercourse has been found. So therefore her mother, i.e. his wife, will become haram and unlawful for him. Okay. The next issue is if a boy touches his stepmother with an evil intention, she will become haram on a husband. So straightforward, like if a person touches his stepmother, his father's wife, then obviously she will become haram upon a husband, i.e. his father. There is no way in which she can be halal for him. If the stepmother touches her stepson with an evil intention, the same rule will apply. Now if hurmat musahara happens, what's the ruling? The ruling the scholars have given is that the husband will have to divorce his wife. Just say, for example, if hurmat musahara was established that a man touched his daughter or his mother-in-law in a lawful way, then obviously his wife becomes haram for him. So therefore, the masla or the ruling is that he will have to divorce his wife straight away. And if he doesn't divorce her, and if he remains with her, then obviously the time they live with each other, then it will be considered as adultery and fornication and haram. Now before we look at the next part, just some hadiths which I've got on the slide in front of you. Because a lot of people, they ask, hurmat musahara, where does it say in the Quran, where does it say in the hadith regarding hurmat musahara? So I just thought I'd just mention some hadiths with regards to hurmat musahara and some fatawas of companions with regards to this particular issue. So if we look at the first hadith, which can be found in Sunan, that a man committed adultery with his mother-in-law. Imran bin Hussein, who is a companion, he gave the fatwa or ruling that his wife had become unlawful on. That is found in Sunan. Second hadith, which is found in Mabsut al-Tarafi, where Sayyidina Ibn Umar gave a fatwa that if a person has intercourse with a woman, kisses, touches her with lust, or looks at the inner part of her vulva with lust, then that woman cannot marry his father's son. The woman's mother and daughter will be unlawful on him. The hadith number 3, Sayyidina Abu Hanif, also a Sahabi, narrates that the Prophet of Allah ﷺ said, the person who looks at a woman's private part, her mother and daughter, and unlawful upon him, this can be found in Musannaf Ibn Abi Shaybah, and Imam Mujahid rahmatullah has given a fatwa that when a man kisses, touches or looks towards a woman's private part, her mother and daughter are unlawful for him. This is found in Al-Muhalla Ibn Hazm. And lastly, Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab anhu, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Mas'ud anhu, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Abbas anhu, Sayyidina Jabir, Hazrat Ubay ibn Ka'b, and Hazrat Aisha anhum have all given fatwas regarding its unlawfulness. That Hurmat al-Musahara is something which is very dangerous and it should be avoided. Now before we go for the break, we could just look at the next section. And that is with regards to, obviously we're under the section of women whom you cannot marry. So under this section we'll be looking at some marriages, whether it is permissible or not. Like for example, whether it's permissible to marry fornicators, or whether it is permissible to marry Christians and Jews, whether it's permissible to marry Hindus and Sikhs, whether it's permissible to marry Shias, what does Islam say with regards to Nikah Muta, Nikah Misyat, and finally with regards to engagements. Okay. Now, starting with the first one, you have handouts in front of you. Marrying fornicators. If a woman is a habitual fornicator, if a man is a habitual fornicator, now the masla or ruling is that whether it is permissible for a chaste woman to marry such a man, that whether it is permissible for a chaste man to marry such a woman. Now in the Hanafi fiqh, and this is also mentioned in the fiqh of Imam Malik rahmatullah alayh and Imam Shafi rahmatullah alayh, and that is that marriage with fornicators is permissible. That it is permissible to marry fornicators. A man is a habitual fornicator. He's always committing adultery and so on. But if a chaste woman wants to get married to this man, then it is lawful, it is halal. A woman is a habitual fornicator, so if a chaste man wants to get married to her, then it is halal and lawful. Now the objection is with regards to a verse which is found in Surah An-Nur. And the verse in Surah An-Nur is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said, الزاني لا ينكه إلا زانية أو مشركة والزاني لا ينكحها إلا زان أو مشرك وحرم ذلك على المؤمنين. Now the meaning of that particular verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that a zani, i.e. a male fornicator, he cannot marry besides a female fornicator. Illa zaniyatan means besides a female fornicator or a mushrik or a disbeliever. وَالزَّانِيَةُ لَا يَنْكِهُهَا إِلَّا زَانٍ أَوْ مُشْرِكٍ. And a female fornicator cannot marry besides a male fornicator or a male disbeliever. Now from that particular verse, it seems as though that to marry a fornicator is haram, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that fornicators, they can only marry fornicators or disbelievers, whereas the question we're looking at is that whether a chaste man can marry fornicators or not. Now many interpretations have been given with regards to this verse, but the common interpretation with regards to this verse is that this verse of Surah An-Nur is got nothing to do with the injunction. It's not a hukum, it's not a ruling. Meaning that from this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is illustrating on a state of mind, or is illustrating on a state. Now what do I mean by that? It's like, for example, a person who's a good Muslim, okay, who's a practicing Muslim, then he wants to stay with good people. Like he will come to talks, he will come to lectures, he will stay with ulamas and so on. On the other hand, an evil person, a bad person, who's really far away from Islam, then he doesn't like coming to the mosque. He doesn't like staying with the ulama. He wants to stay with his bad boys and so on. Now, similarly, with regards, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying from this verse, that a fornicator, he naturally, because he's involved in this immoral and obnoxious act, that naturally he would like to get married to another fornicator. Like a person who's committing fornication, who's committing adultery all the time, then naturally he would like to get married to a girl who's also a fornicator. Okay? Or like, for example, he would like to get married to a girl who's a disbeliever. He doesn't like getting married to pious, religious, chaste Muslim women. So from that particular verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that adulterous nature becomes such that he likes marrying an adulterer. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that is a ruling, but it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is stating state here. So therefore, the ruling, the conclusion is that it is permissible for Muslim men or chaste men to marry female fornicators, and similarly for male fornicators to marry female Muslim chaste women. Now, in this particular section, I haven't actually put a slide for this, is with regards to whether it is permissible to marry a pregnant woman who is pregnant through fornication. Like, for example, just say a boyfriend, girlfriend situation where the boyfriend has done intercourse with this girl and she becomes pregnant. Now, obviously, the child is obviously walad zina, he's a legitimate child. Now, the question is that whether that boyfriend can marry this girl, okay? Or whether, and the second situation is that whether another person can marry that particular girl. Now, the mas'ala in the Hanafi fiqh is that the father of the child, even though the fornication intercourse was done prior to the marriage, but the father of the child, after his girlfriend becomes pregnant, he can get married to this girl. He's the father of the child, so therefore he can get married to this girl, and on top of that, he can have intercourse with her, he can have sexual intercourse with her all the way until she gives birth. So that is the first one, where a girl, she's become pregnant, so if the person who wants to get married to her is the father of the child, then he can get married to her, and on top of that, he can have sexual intercourse with her all the way until she gives birth. Okay? Obviously, the ruling whether you can have sex during pregnancy and so on is something which we're going to look at next week. And the second situation is that a woman, she's pregnant, but the father of child is someone, like he's Zayd who lived in London. So, and the woman is from Birmingham. Now she's pregnant, and now she wants to get married to someone. Okay? Now the mas'ala is that Bakr, who lives in Birmingham, he wants to get married to this girl who's pregnant, but he is not the father of the child. The father is someone else. So the mas'ala, the ruling is that it is permissible for Bakr to get married to her. However, he will not be allowed, or he will not be permitted to have intercourse with her until she gives birth. Okay, so the marriage will be done, the validity of the nikah is done. However, he's not allowed to have intercourse with her, he's not allowed to have any sexual intercourse with her until she gives birth. And this is because of a hadith which can be found in Sunan al-Tirmidhi, where the Prophet ﷺ said that a person should not water another person's plantation. Now the meaning of this particular hadith is that a woman who's pregnant, then that is like a plantation. So a strange man or another man who's not the father of the child, then he can get married to her, but whilst getting married to her, it would be unlawful for him to have intercourse with her. Why? Because it's as though he is putting water in another man's plantation. And another man's child, he is, putting semen there, and that is something which is not allowed and something which is impermissible. So the conclusion is that a woman who's pregnant through fornication, you can marry her in both situations. However, if you are the father of the child, then you can actually have sexual intercourse with her. If you are not the father of the child, then obviously you should refrain from having sexual intercourse with her all the way until she gives birth. Okay, inshallah, we'll leave it here. Then marriage with non-Muslims will continue after the break.